and there's obviously a limit to how high up the classified ladder this goes. I'm of the mindset that Netanyahu decided to. I'm not saying that he didn't have a conversation with Trump about attacking Iran. I have no doubt that conversation happened. But in terms of when it was going to occur and when he ultimately decided to move forward with this, I think there's a fairly reasonable assumption here that he just did it on his own terms and assumes that America is going to come right along with him.
Let me just say something. I always tell folks, you've heard me say it before, I can give you facts, assumptions, and opinions. And I got to tell you, I agree with your assumption. I'm sure we've talked about this before. I wrote a book, Deadly Betrayal, The Truth About Why We Invaded Iraq. Something I put in there about the neocons and others that have been pushing us into these wars for decades. And one of the things they do, and part of their play plan, they talked about this openly in the past, is that to undermine a current president. And I think, and I feel real confident in saying this, though it's an assumption, that there were people working with Bibi that knew he was going to do this, and he got the green light from them. And I got to be honest, I don't think Trump knew. And now Trump is playing the game now, so he won't look bad. Now, that's an assumption, but I can give you a fact that part of the neocons' playbook is to undermine any current president like they did with President Bush, if you will. As Larry will know, during the second Iraq war, between Dick Cheney's office and the Department of Defense, they were blindsiding, in fact, quite frankly, the State Department and President Bush and pushing him into the war, and they were undermining him in certain circumstances. One example we talk about now, we got this disagreement going between Tulsi Gabbard said, hey, they were not making a nuclear bomb. That's the intel. You had Rumsfeld back in the day said, hey, I have intel that the generals don't have, and we know. I remember him saying an ape would know that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. Well, guess what? He didn't. And guess who Rumsfeld intel was? A guy by the name of Curveball, who was discredited by the German intel, which Larry know more about. And so I feel overly confident that Trump didn't know, but there were certain people that did knew that are undermining him.
Yeah. Colonel, I'm going to take you back a visit to your late friend and somebody who you hold in high esteem, as do a lot of other people, especially anyone who served in the military. General Powell obviously was in a very tough spot. Lord knows to what extent he knew ahead of time. But if we can take a step back in time, and I remember it very well, even as a young college student, I can remember looking around just thinking there's no sense around this idea that we have to invade Iraq. This makes no sense. And I think that was a sentiment that was felt by a lot of people. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the country, I think, was feeling that way. I think the overwhelming majority of the country wanted to get bin Laden, obviously. But I think as it relates to what ultimately ended up happening, it was very difficult to sell this idea that the way to get bin Laden is to invade Iraq until this happened.
Anything that we know. But what I can share with you, when combined with what all of us have learned over the years, is deeply troubling. What you will see is an accumulation of facts and disturbing patterns of behavior. The facts in Iraq's behavior demonstrate that Saddam Hussein and his regime have made no effort to disarm as required by the international community. Indeed, the facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction. None of this should come as a surprise to any of us. Terrorism has been a tool used by Saddam for decades. Saddam was a supporter of terrorism long before these terrorist networks had a name. And this support continues. The nexus of poisons and terror is new. The nexus of Iraq and terror is old. The combination is lethal. With this track record, Iraqi denials of supporting terrorism take their place alongside the other Iraqi denials of weapons of mass destruction. It is all a web of lies. When we confront a regime that harbors ambitions for regional domination, hides weapons of mass destruction, and provides haven and active support for terrorists, we are not confronting the past. We are confronting the present. And unless we act, we are confronting an even more frightening future.
I think, as I just mentioned, and obviously would like to hear your thoughts, I do think that his level of credibility and respect is what swayed millions of Americans' opinions about whether or not going to war or invading Iraq in the spring of 2003 was something that up until then was not something that anybody wanted to do. And we're going to transition this into the conversation about Tulsi in a minute. But I am curious if from where you stood, and obviously a lot changed over the course of time when that statement was made, I think you would like to believe over the last 20 plus years that a lot of people have learned a little bit more of the so-called playbook that is put in front of us, whether we have knowledge of it ahead of time or not. But I think that a lot of that playbook that was employed 23 years ago, they're attempting to employ it again now with Iran. Only now, Iran is a completely different animal. And I think when you think about all the people that had served in Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan, they're looking at this now just saying, this is sort of the same thing all over again. Would you agree that there is a lot of similarities in terms of the MO that is being employed right now by the Trump administration?
Yes, and it doesn't seem to register, at least it's not registering in a powerful way with a lot of the American people. That said, the polls now show all across the political spectrum, 60% plus of Americans are not for this war. I would dare say that was probably similar in the time of the invasion of Iraq. And then Powell went on. And one of the things that I found out immediately following his presentation was that he had made a major impact on the polls in America, and I suspect internationally too. And it took me back to the moment when he came in and charged me to get him ready for it, 7 days and 7 nights out at the CIA, and 1 day and night in New York. He said, when I asked him why, "What do you mean why?" he said. I said, "Why you? John Negroponte's our ambassador in New York. Adlai Stevenson was sufficient for the Cuban Missile Crisis. Why you?" And he looked at me and he said, "You need to ask me that." And I knew exactly what he meant. He had poll ratings that were the equivalent of Mother Teresa's. He was constantly 78, 79, 80% in the polls favorable. That they used him. And when we had finished and the pillars of his presentation began to collapse one by one as we went through that summer, the last one, I think it was George Tenet who called him, maybe John McLaughlin, his deputy, and told him that the mobile biological labs had finally been taken off the CIA website because they were fake too. He was angry. He was not a happy camper. He knew he'd been used. And I've since, through a lot of good students, figured out how he was used in great detail. The vice president went to the CIA 11 times, a whole litany of things that happened that he knew nothing about. And I knew nothing about. We only were exposed to a couple of analysts. We should have suspected something when that happened. We weren't exposed to those analysts in the CIA who did not believe that Saddam had nuclear weapons or was working on them, and so on. Let me fast forward, though, and say that this is so much deja vu all over again, if you will. We are looking at the same roadmap, the same type of development of false intelligence. And Tulsi Gabbard's testimony in March, and then the reversal of it, if you will, by Trump at the plane door, is a perfect example of it. I don't care about any intelligence coming from the 17 entities of the intelligence community. What I care about is what I know, and what I know comes from Bibi, and it comes from those billionaires behind me, those neocon billionaires, those technocratic billionaires behind me, that, including Miriam Adelson, that want this war. So we are a little bit different sheet of music, but we're doing the same thing. And again, I go back to what I said originally. We're doing it because we are so scared of China. We want to check her everywhere she creates a new alliance, everywhere she puts a new base road initiative, if you will. And everywhere that looks like it might develop in a way that will be contrary to our economic and trade interests. And this is the last place. It coincides with the clean break strategy, which was the last place, not for fighting China, but for the neocons who wanted a clean sweep in that region of the world for Israel. And Dennis is absolutely right. You can lay at the feet of Israel 75% of the crimes the United States has perpetrated since 9/11. Before too, but we had presidents before that would check Israel. H.W. Bush checked them. Ronald Reagan checked them. Not since 9/11. No one checks Israel at all. And I will tell you, when Ariel Sharon went into the Oval Office, who was then the prime minister, not much better than Netanyahu, and was told by George W. Bush that the peace process had failed, that the roadmap was dead, that Powell's work was really not being successful, over to you, that started it big time. Because what he told Sharon was taken by Netanyahu and executed. They've been doing it ever since. We think he's killing people in Gaza now, great numbers, of course, and he's using Iran as cover for that. But he was killing people in Gaza before. He was killing people in the West Bank before. The October 7th attack by Hamas just gave him an excuse to expand it majorly. And now he's hiding all the killing underneath the Iran crisis.
Well, you brought up a great point. You know, we always try to point out on our channel that prior to October 7th, there were 700 Palestinians that were mass murdered by Israel in the year 2023, just before.
Yes.
And the whole propaganda machine that Israel has perpetuated on our culture stretches back to Iraq, 9/11, the Cold War. This has been going on forever. And so much of what has transpired post-World War II that has, on the one hand, enriched this country in exponential ways, at the same time, has made us in many ways potentially a pariah because of the fact that we have attached ourselves to the creation of Israel, which obviously was in place as soon as everything was decided post, I'm forgetting the name of the meeting right now, but the meeting that took place after the war between, obviously, the United States, England, and the Soviet Union, and determining how we're going to basically break up, the rest of the world, because this is like 1984 come to life.
Yeah,
and
one
of the discussions.
The Israelis were maximal terrorists against the British.
Oh yeah,
they killed them.
Remember the King David Hotel
yes.
that they blew up. And that's what kicked the Brits out. They a terrorist attack on the King David Hotel.
The one thing that I think is happening now that wasn't happening 23 years ago is I think that the American people, remember, Lincoln's greatest saying, in my opinion, was you can fool some of the people all the time. You can fool all the people some of the time. You cannot fool all the people all of the time. And they are attempting to fool the people again with the state of Israel, that now a lot of people are looking at and saying, wow, maybe this proxy state really is akin to all of the bad things that we've been doing at home and abroad for generations. So the one thing I think will come of this, regardless of how it ends, is I think the state of Israel and the Israel lobby to a greater extent is on its way out in this country, which is why they have gone to such lengths and are spending such incredible amounts of money to manipulate our electoral process and influence our domestic and foreign policy. As a result, I think they've become way too exposed now, and way too many people are aware of their actions, what AIPAC does and all of these other nonprofits, if you will, which is why when Tulsi makes this statement back in March, and then she's going to flip on it, it goes to show you that it isn't really a question of whether she believes what she's saying. It's she's being told to say something different. So here's what Tulsi said. And like I said, this is in so many ways a carbon copy, not exactly, but it rhymes, as they say, with what General Powell did back in 2002.
Iran continues to seek expansion of its influence in the Middle East, despite the degradation to its proxies and defenses during the Gaza conflict. Iran has developed and maintains ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and UAVs, including systems capable of striking U.S. targets and allies in the region. Tehran has shown a willingness to use these weapons, including during a 2020 attack on U.S. forces in Iraq and in attacks against Israel in April and October 2024. Iran's cyber operations and capabilities also present a serious threat to U.S. networks and data. The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003.
Well, I would say that that's a pretty definitive statement, gentlemen. What do you think?
I think it's a definitive statement, and I'll tell you why. Because I know that they are enriching very, what I would call a threshold nuclear program. They've enriched to the point where it's a very short distance to enrichment that would be suitable for a bomb. But that's not all there is to it. You have got to fashion a warhead. You've got to create the warhead that will withstand reentry heats and temperatures. You've got to match that warhead with a missile. You've got to match that and test it. I went through this with North Korea. The first North Korean test, we didn't even detect. The seismic center in Geneva warned us that there had been an event, so we were able to put the sniffers in the air and everything. And the second one we were able to detect. But I don't think she's wrong. I think they have not decided that this other stage or stages that is very time intensive and really takes some hard work had happened yet. So you're looking at maybe 2 to 3 years before that highly enriched uranium really could go into something that would work. And she got reversed. And as I understand it now, they have put Will Ruger in charge at the DNI, Charles Koch employee, mind you, for a number of years beforehand. I know Will. And his job is to make sure nothing gets up to Tulsi that she can't, handle. In other words, nothing like this is going to get up to her again.
The one thing I will say in General Powell's defense is I was a young kid at the time, but I do remember 1995, 1996. They wanted somebody to run against me for president of the United States on the Republican side. And if I had to deal with General Powell, I might have had a lot of problems. But of course, he decided not to run in 96 against Clinton. And of course,
what a different world it would be had he run.
I definitely agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I'll tell you one thing. If General Powell was president of the United States, there never would have been a repeal of Glass-Steagall. That much I feel pretty confident in saying.
I can tell you that for a fact, and I don't think 9/11 would have happened.
You know what? The problem that I think a lot of people don't understand, and we've talked about this at length, the three of us have talked about this at length. When the people that are representative today, like Pompeo was and Bolton was, and then, of course, you had Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld and, of course, Cheney. The bureaucrats, you have the bureaucrats that, especially the ones that have never served in combat, are always the most dangerous people in politics. And especially the Zionist movement, the ones that are so ready, willing, and able to throw everyone else under the bus for their so-called cause. Now, where Tulsi comes into play, and Dennis, I'm sure you have an opinion or two about this. Here's somebody who, again, is sort of the modern day version of General Powell. She's a lieutenant colonel in the Army. She serves in the medics division. She is actually the person who goes into the line of fire and has to help people that are injured on the battlefield. I mean, she is a real woman of honor in that respect. And there is a certain amount of gravitas that comes with that a bureaucrat who sits on the high horse in DC can't possibly sell. But if she's coming out there and is making any type of a statement, there is a certain level of credibility that comes with that, but that also leads to a lot more of a dangerous situation of believing false pretenses. Tell me I'm wrong about that.
Well, let me mention that, and I want to digress on a couple of points too. But let me just mention, Tulsi is no Colin Powell, okay? But let me just say this. Her credibility preceded her because of the fact, early on, I used to be a fan of hers because of the fact she was against warmongers and the neocons, and she spoke out publicly against them. and these continuous wars. She was against them. Now, let me mention about Colin Powell and digress a minute. We'll go back to her in a moment. When Larry had mentioned, Colin said, hey, why? Why me? What you must understand is at the time, Colin Powell, as far as a cabinet member in the administration, was the most credible person in that administration. And that's why they sent him to do that. Secondly, I don't want to speak for Larry, but one of the things that got Larry and I together, we jumped on this crusade. Larry spent a lot of time over at the CIA prepping over there for Colin Powell. Colin Powell left this earth saying that was the biggest stain on his career and credibility. And Larry, as his chief of staff, they had to pain him because he was over there prepping him and trying to make sure that Colin Powell was not giving any bad information. In fact, Larry tried to resist a lot. But what was going on there, once again, is that from my perspective and what I saw in the Pentagon, from what I would call, we had the Pentagon Papers, and now I'll call the Iraq Papers, which I was a part of, is that you had, a lot of you heard about the Special Intelligence Cell at the Pentagon. Well, I worked around some of those guys, and they were feeding information and overriding the CIA. They were on loan from the DIA. Some of them reluctant, but some of the two individuals I know, they jumped on this to be a part of this. And so Powell was set up, went to his grave, felt that was a stain on his career. Now, with that said, though, Tulsi Gabbard, she brings some credibility because of what I said earlier. She was against these type of things. But now the pressure is being put on her. Now, her way out, I looked at her response when she came out and said, hey, the media is trying to separate the president and myself. And in her comments, where she'll be able to go back and say, she said, hey, look, I am not no different from the president. I know right now, though they're not building one, but her words were, they are at the point where they can produce one. Well, okay, that may be true, but they're not producing one. And I want to digress one more time, something that you said earlier, Peter, because I usually close my presentations by saying this, but since you brought something earlier that relates to this, the same playbook is happening again. That's why I got on this crusade to stop this playbook. And I've been ending a lot of my presentations by saying, fool us once, government, WMD, Iraq, shame on you, government. Fool us again, Iran, nuclear weapons, shame on us. Because the playbook is being replayed.
Or just quote Dick Cheney. I can quote him verbatim. We know with absolute certainty that Saddam Hussein has a nuclear weapon.
And how about Rumsfeld? Trained ape. Trained ape know that they have WMD. Flat out lies. And now let me just say this. And once again, Trump knows better than his intel folks. I doubt it.
One thing I will never forget about Rumsfeld is the statement he made on September 10th, 2001, about the money that can't be accounted for at the Pentagon. Right. Just a little bit of inconvenience. We'll finish this up.
The IC continues to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program. In the past year, we've seen an erosion of a decades-long taboo in Iran on discussing nuclear weapons in public, likely emboldening nuclear weapons advocates within Iran's decision-making apparatus. Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is at its highest levels and is unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons. Iran will likely continue efforts to counter Israel and press for U.S. military withdrawal from the region by aiding, arming, and helping to reconstitute its loose consortium of like-minded terrorists and militant actors, which it refers to as its axis of resistance. Although weakened, this collection of actors still presents a wide range of threats, including to Israel's population, U.S. forces deployed in Iraq and Syria, and to U.S. and international military and commercial shipping and transit.
Now, that statement's all well and good, but then Tulsi decides to give a response tweet because the Donald has something to say that I don't really care what she has to say. I totally understand everything and you understand nothing. So, I'm a really stable genius, keep in mind. But so Tulsi, rather than push back against the dear leader, if you will, decided to issue this statement. The dishonest media is intentionally taking my testimony out of context and spreading fake news as a way to manufacture division. America has intelligence that Iran is at the point that it can produce a nuclear weapon within weeks to months. If they decide to finalize the assembly, President Trump has been clear that it can't happen, and I agree. Okay, so let's just for a moment say that that is all true. Why are we in a situation right now where we would even have to think about this? Could it be because an unprovoked attack on Tehran, on civilian populations within Iran, was perpetuated by Israel at the hand of a genocidal madman in Netanyahu? I would think that would be enough grounds for Iran to figure that, hey, you know what, we need to protect ourselves.